What's up, everyone? Good morning. Welcome to today's show. We are talking about how to know when to progress exercise. This is going to be a great discussion, and it comes off the back of some of our coaching, UMS coaching tribes questions recently. And we feel that it's important to talk about because it's very different when you're progressing calisthenics in comparison to weights or cardio exercise, and there's a few things that really need to be pointed out, and a lot of people get this wrong. Before we get started, in case we haven't met, my name's Yanni Bormeister. To my left, yeah, for you guys is Richard Lillies, and we are Unity Gym head coaches and head coaches to the Unified Movement System, where we turn driven people like yourself into strong, flexible, fit athletes. Of course, if you're on YouTube, we would love you long time if you gently press that like button. I'm going to do it right now, and give us a shout out in the comments, and we'll send you back some love. And big warm welcome to everyone tuning in the Movement Mastermind Facebook group. If you haven't already, it's a great place to join. You can post videos. It's a great forum for personal development, and you get access to some pretty cool stuff over there too, like our 20-minute flexibility routine, one of our most popular routines to date. Our warm-ups for the UMS upper and lower body routines. They're great 10-minute exercise routines, mobility routines. And also you get access to our 5-day flexibility challenge to work with RAD. Richie, how are you?
Right. I think this topic is a great one and an important one for people to really, I guess, listen to. You can learn a lot from these shows, I think. There's not a lot of information out there on this that's easily accessible on YouTube, and there's a lot of information, so it can be confusing. So hopefully we clear it up.
Absolutely. I feel like I'm in a little bit of a dungeon today with my lighting because I had the sun in my eyes before, so I had to close my blinds. But it isn't nighttime here in Sydney, Australia. It's a beautiful sunny morning
Yeah.
outside, a little bit too sunny.
Yeah.
And my office here has all glass window frontage, and it just got a little bit too intense. Morning, Vinny, in the Movement Mastermind group. So recently we've had some back and forth with a couple of tribe members, and really who sort of are progressing slower than we would like, because there's reason to be meticulous about form and technique, particularly in calisthenics. But there also comes a time when you're going to plateau if you don't increase
Mm.
intensity. And a lot of people find it difficult to find the sweet spot. We want exercise. If we break down what's happening when we exercise, we essentially start at a baseline, and this what I'm going to talk about is actually called supercompensation, the principle of supercompensation. And what happens is we start at a baseline where I wish I had have got organized, and I've got an actual diagram for this that we could have brought up on the screen. It would have looked amazing. But anyway, I'll try to do my best to explain this to you. We have a baseline of strength or flexibility or fitness that we start from. And then we hit it with some stimulus, which is our exercise, whether it's going for a run, whether it's stretching, doing flexibility exercises, or resistance training exercises through weightlifting or calisthenics. And what that does is it actually momentarily depletes us. It depletes our muscle systems, our neurological system. And for the brief period after that stimulus, after our workout, we're weaker, and that's where we're exhausted and we need to recover. We recover from rest, sleep, and nutrition. We feed our body what it needs to repair the damaged tissue, depending on how strenuous the exercise was. We recharge the muscle glycogen, which is the energy source for the muscles. And if we get the timing right for the next bout of stimulus, the curve of our strength sort of looks like it goes along, drops after the stimulus, and then it rebounds. And at the peak of that rebound is what's referred to as the peak of supercompensation. And at that point, we want to re-stimulate the body. But the catch is that we also need to be combining the principle of supercompensation with what's referred to as the principle of progressive overload. And progressive overload is referring to the fact that if we hit our body with the same stimulus, then it's not going to have the same effect because we've just adapted to that stimulus. And if we're timing it right, which we do here at Unity Gym, we make sure that our tribe are working on a program split where we stimulate the same muscles again, the same movements at just the right time, which is roughly 72 hours afterwards, or 3 days. And so we've had time to recover and we've had time to hit that peak. And then we hit it with another dose of stimulus that is slightly more difficult than the previous stimulus. And that's the concept of progressive overload. If we were to hit it with the same stimulus over and over and over again, we would plateau because the body has adapted to that level of intensity already. And we can manipulate many variables to increase the stimulus. The most obvious is if you're lifting weights, we lift slightly heavier weights. We add a kilo or two or a pound or two to the lift. The other variables that we can manipulate, which we of course put all of these to work, is time under tension. So we can manipulate the tempo of the exercise itself. We can manipulate the volume, which is the amount of sets, reps, or time under tension, or a combination of all of those that we use. We can also get really fancy and manipulate the rest between sets, the recovery periods, all sorts of stuff like that. But we won't get too much into that. I don't want to bore you with the detail. But where people get stifled is we teach that a rep isn't a rep unless it's a good rep, and your first rep should look like your last rep, meaning you maintain good form and technique, because when there's a breakdown of form and technique, that's going beyond the point of failure. And when one, it raises the risk of injury, but two, it's not really training the nervous system very well. But you have to take that in context, because if some people, I think, and this is what Richard highlighted recently and it was Richard's idea to do a show about this, which I think is great. Some people take that concept too far, and that they want perfect movement, and they get too caught up in the finer principles. And frankly, there is no perfect movement, because every person's body is slightly different. Everyone's moving at different paces. Everyone has a different history with exercise, injury, illness. Sometimes genetics play a role. Our environment plays a role. How much time you spend seated is going to change the way your body interprets movement through posture. And so if we get too caught up, there's sort of like a point of diminishing returns, right, Richard? Where if we get too caught up in how our form is and our technique, then we can become stifled.
Yeah, I think it comes down to like what the specifics really, like what you're doing, like when it comes to a very complex, very skill-based movement. It's very important to be very analytical of your technique, because ultimately this complex movement, the little 1%ers can really add up to something that doesn't quite look like how you want it, and what's going to give you like improvements in performance. But when it comes to like, let's just take the gym, for example, a bench press, a bicep curl, a squat. Some of the compound movements require a fair bit of technique and technique perfection, but then others require less. And these other movements, we don't necessarily need to spend as much time perfecting the technique. We just need to be more focused on really the effort that we're going through, how many, and the other loading variables, how many reps we're doing, how many sets we're doing, how much effort we're going through in the set. And again, it becomes about like longer term programming rather than the actual technique. Things like bench press and squat, some people argue, yeah, there's always 1%ers that you can improve. Definitely. I'm a big advocate of, improving those 1%ers, but at the same time, increasing our load increasing the reps or changing the variability up from program to program really does become to be the outweighing factor of what gets you to improve rather than those 1%ers in a lot of cases. So yeah, we harp on a lot about technique optimization and how that is really important, especially for new people. But as you get older, as your training age increases, it becomes more about, you know, the long-term programming that really gives you those big improvements going forward,
Yep.
and less about the technique.
Yep. Absolutely. And a lot of the time I see I notice that the people that seem to get stifled too much with technique, it's because they've had an injury or it's because something's happened to them in the past, and that's a very reasonable thing to think about. Like it
Yep.
can freak you out when it can make you a little bit nervous and a little bit more cautious when you've experienced some sort of compromise in the body from overdoing it or mismanaging load. But there is a notion in strength and conditioning, and a lot of strength coaches will sort of suggest this, that you shouldn't lift, like you should try to increase the load or the intensity every single workout. You should try to, if it's
Mm.
safe to do so.
Yep.
And that can be a very small amount. It doesn't have to be a lot. And that's why at Unity Gym we used to have fractional weight plates that were as small as half a kilo, which is, what's that, a
Yep.
pound.
Yep.
And we have magnetic fractional weights to go on the dumbbells and things like that, and all these ways that we could very incrementally increase the weight, the intensity of the movements. And with calisthenics, it's a little bit more tricky. The way we increase the load is by either progressing the movement to a more difficult exercise progression, or because we're manipulating leverage with calisthenics. It's not that we can just add a little bit of weight
Yep.
to our bodies, or we increase the total time under tension that we're doing. So we have to increase how much we're working, how much actual working time there is in a static hold or something like that. But it is a really, really critical part of the development of the stimulus is progressive overload. If you find that you're doing the same stimulus over and over again, and this is particularly true with calisthenics, then there does come a time when you are going to start to experience diminishing returns,
Yep.
and then at that point, that's when it's very useful to have great coaches to look at and say, okay, I want you to progress to this movement or change it up here, or do this. But if you're experiencing that, it's most likely the fact that you need to find a way to progress the intensity of that exercise, or
Yep.
manipulate the other loading variables. Time under tension, tempo, rest, and there's all these different ways that you can do it. If you're in a calisthenics workout and you don't have access to free weights, which we love combining these two methods of training, because maximal strength is really, it's very difficult to produce the same results in maximal strength development without free weights.
Mm.
And we like to use calisthenics as a way to demonstrate that maximal strength development. That's, like, I think, the gold standard of exercise if you're not training for a sport. But that's not to say you can't develop strength alone with calisthenics. We have a whole, like, our UMS is two pathways: at-home workouts and gym workouts. And the at-home workouts don't use any equipment. It's just designed to be used with to be able to do with what you've got at home. And we try to keep the programs as similar as possible so that people can actually cross between the two if they lose access to their equipment on vacation or in lockdown. Was when we decided to create the at-home workouts. When we were all going into lockdown from the health pandemic a couple of years ago, and or right now in China. But we yeah, like, it just comes back to sort of knowing when to progress, understanding that what Richard said there is really true. In the early stages of your training age, technique optimization is the number one goal. That's what we believe, and our first three phases of programming are called the technique optimization phase. which
Yep.
usually goes for 12 weeks. But then once you start to bank some time training, the overload variables and the concept of progressive overload becomes more and more important. Otherwise, you will
Yep.
plateau.
Yep.
And you know, it's something that you definitely need to consider.
Yeah, and it is very different between weightlifting and calisthenics. I think calisthenics it does require a lot more of a keen eye to really spot when it is ready to. So I don't blame for some people not knowing when to progress with calisthenics, because it really does require some experience and some coaching to understand like the reasons to progress or when to progress. Um, Whereas weightlifting, it's same thing. It's very, some of the movements are very technique heavy, but I feel like they can be a little bit easier to progress in terms of like the variables, because you have that ability to marginally go up in weight fractionally. So yeah, sometimes with calisthenics, it's a matter of just banking more time at the current progression, whereas weightlifting, you can afford to progress with a little bit of weight. So there is a bit of difference. Yeah.
The other one is flexibility training. Flexibility training is sort of different to both of them,
Yep.
because the adaptation process for flexibility training is tends to be a lot more gradual and a lot
Mm,
slower than weightlifting, because it's you're trying to manipulate the body into positions that it's not used to and not comfortable doing, as opposed to strength training where you're loading the body in movements that you are comfortable doing. You're
yep.
trying to make the weightlifting or resistance training as mechanically advantageous as possible, usually, to
Yep.
be safe. And with stretching and flexibility training and loaded stretching, it's very different for the body. The body has to really build up confidence and strength and stability in those movements. So you can tend to get away with using the same exercise progressions for much longer. I would say almost double the time. We
Yep.
tend to keep people on the same flexibility progressions for 8 weeks as opposed to 4 weeks for strength training, and there's a very good reason for that. It just you still yield a good return in your time spent in those flexibility movements, because the adaptation process it tends to be much slower for people.
Yep.
And so when we're talking about when to progress a movement, and a lot of people, you know, get a little bit confused with this. Yeah, flexibility training, you can tend to sit on the same progressions for much longer, and that is just due to the fact that the adaptation is less linear, and it's flexibility is kind of a little bit frustrating at times. It feels like you go 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, because
Yep.
if you overstretch, you overcook the muscles, you're stiff and sore. You can't do the same, the next workout, and it's just like, oh man, what's going on here, And then you have a week away, and then come back, and you've made a huge leap forward, and it's quite confusing. But it's all about how the brain is adapting and becoming more comfortable, and it's about developing that strength and stability through range.
Yep. So how do we know when to progress, Yanni? Like that's, I think, the question we got to answer, and it's going to be a little bit different for like a multitude of factors, movements. But I think it comes down to a big part of it is training age, how long you've been doing the movement for. If it's a slightly complex movement and you've only been doing it a couple of weeks, the fact is that you probably get more gains of practicing it for a few more weeks doing what you're doing, because a big component of strength is actually that coordination. The more you practice it, the more coordinated you get, the stronger you get at it. But once we sort of step outside of that couple of weeks range, then and of course your technique is pretty solid, then I guess it would start to become more pertinent that you load the movements more, you spend more time, and that means more repetitions, more sets, potentially more times in the week frequency, um, and yeah, increasing that intensity.
Yeah. So as a templated rule with UMS, we like to say We have macro splits, macro cycles, mesocycles, and microcycles. And if you think about it really simply, a macro cycle is a goal specific. You're trying to achieve this in this amount of time. It can be months, it can be years.
Mm.
A mesocycle is usually a portion of that with a specific sort of goal. It may be the goal may be just to bank a certain amount of volume, a certain amount of workouts. We tend to say a macro cycle for us is 6 to 12 months. A mesocycle is a week, and a microcycle is a week, and a mesocycle is a 4 week period. And within the mesocycle, uh, we have different sort of goals in the intensity. Generally, the first week we call a learning phase, which is usually the reintroduction of new movements or a new overload method. And the overload method's just designed to improve the efficiency of the workout. And then in the second week, we tend to that's the first time that we sort of are starting to become adept to the movements, the overload method. The body's starting to understand it. The first week there is a huge rate of adaptation neurologically, developing that coordination, figuring out what weights you can lift. We have a lot of guys in our later stage in from phases sort of 5 to 12 where they're starting to introduce quite advanced overload methods. They get the weights wrong in the first week because they're just not used to having so much more load and so much more volume thrown upon them. And so then the second week is when you really figure it out. The third week is when your body is peaking in adaptation. So that's what we usually refer to as the peak week, where we generally encourage our more senior guys to train really to their absolute red line there, and possibly even to neurological and neuromuscular failure in a couple of the sets in each workout. And then the fourth week, we generally, if you are one of our senior tribe, you will usually have a back off week if you've trained, if you've got all of that right and you've trained really hard and you've had no interference with your program and training split. Then usually by week 4, we encourage a back off week and we halve the volume and start to get ready for the next mesocycle, the next period. And in that new mesocycle, we will introduce either new movements or new overload method. And we also use what's referred to as an undulating periodization method, which means that we do a program phase of volume. So muscular hypertrophy is the goal. That's a mesocycle of muscular hypertrophy. And then we do a mesocycle, a 4 week block of intensification, which is maximal strength development. And that is just generally, if you're not training for a specific sport or event, that is just the widely accepted as the best method to produce, all-round strength, flexibility, and athletic body, and it works exceptionally well. But there are times when a really advanced person who's got a training age of 10 plus years would adapt really well on a 3 week mesocycle. And as Richard said, a really new person may find it more suitable when they're learning coordination and they're optimizing technique to work on a 5 or 6 week mesocycle. So they've got a little bit more time to figure things out and build that level of coordination. And so it sort of is individual for everybody. But the template for us at UMS is a 4 week mesocycle, and from time to time we will encourage people to increase that to 6 weeks if they're really new to strength training. And yeah, that's how we do it, and it works really, really well.
Yeah. I think that's all we've got time for, Yanni, unless you've got any other points to
Yeah, we've got a
wrap
couple
up
of
on.
comments quickly on YouTube. Calisthenics forces me to try and understand more about my body and opposed to weights. From my limited perspective, I'm definitely not against weights, though. Yeah, look, calisthenics is a beautiful practice, and we love it, and it's also a really, really great way to demonstrate strength. I think that it's important to do that. It's nice to be able to demonstrate strength outside of the gym. And if you're not sort of competing in CrossFit, or you're not competing in powerlifting or a sport, another sport, then yeah, it's a really great practice. I think I do think there's limitations to calisthenics if you're doing it only and not sort of mixing up weightlifting as well. You know, I think that you
Yeah.
can get better results combining the two, and that's what we try to do. Vinny Brown in the Movement Mastermind has said, I've been cycling through the flexibility master classes 1, 2, and 3, spending about 12 weeks on each. And where possible, I try to increase the intensity of the exercise. Does this make sense to approach it like this? Within those 12 weeks, a deload week will be in there to fall in line with the at-home workouts. Yeah, look, as we said, flexibility training is a little bit subjective because the body adapts at different paces. We know a bit about Vinny. He's been in our tribe for quite some time. And age plays a huge factor, especially in flexibility training, because the adaptation of flexibility is to break down inhibitors in the brain that have formed over your lifetime to protect you from harm. You know, if I was to, the old scene in Kickboxer where Van Damme gets his legs ripped apart by the rope to increase his splits, that's not how you develop flexibility training. That would have a very counterproductive method unless you did that to a child. And I know that sounds awful, but a child may have enough growth hormone to heal the damage done there. An adult wouldn't. And you would produce an injury that would really probably destroy your ability to do the splits,
Yeah.
because your brain is protecting you from harm. That's why it won't let you do the splits. Naturally, our bodies could do the splits because there's nothing joining the tendons from one leg to the other. The joint occurs in the pelvis to the sacrum and the ischium crest. There's nothing joining each leg. So theoretically, if you can lift one leg to 90 degrees, you should be able to lift both legs out. But the brain stops you because you've got no strength in that position. In end ranges, we're much weaker. And
Yep.
so what we're trying to do with flexibility training is reinforce to the brain and central nervous system that it is okay to be in that position. And the only way we do that is to develop strength and stability through range. And so, when we're developing flexibility, we can spend a lot more time on the same movements, as we said before. It's a very different adaptation process than lifting weight. I hope that helps, tribe.
Yeah. All right. Thanks for
Have a
joining
great
us.
day. Have a great weekend. It's Friday, so we're going to be
It
back
is.
next week. We'll see you soon.
And yeah, till then, see you later.